You'll never make anyone proud enough to brag about you, my fiancée said during Sunday dinner with both families watching. I quietly left. Nearly a year later, her father unexpectedly shook my hand after reading headlines about my company's incredible growth. You'll never make anyone proud enough to brag about you. She said it casually, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror that morning. The table went quiet. Forks stopped moving. Somewhere behind me, the oven timer beeped for the rolls nobody would eat now. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked down at my plate. At the pot roast going cold. At the wine glass I hadn't touched all night. I looked at her father, who wasn't looking at me at all. He was studying his napkin like it had suddenly become interesting. That's when something finally clicked. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I set my napkin on the table, folded it once, and stood up. I simply made one decision. At that moment, I thought I was only ending a relationship. Months later, I'd realized I had changed both of our lives forever. I thought we were building a future, a wedding date, a mortgage pre-approval sitting in my email inbox, a life I'd mapped out in my head so many times it felt already lived. I trusted her completely. I believed this relationship was permanent. I had absolutely no idea it had already started falling apart. Not that night, but long before it. I just hadn't been paying attention. Looking back, that dinner wasn't even the beginning. It was just the first time she said the quiet part out loud. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 31. I lived in Astoria, Queens. She worked in luxury real estate marketing. I ran a small logistics consulting firm out of a shared office space in Long Island City. We'd been together 4 years, engaged for 6 months. Stop. That's all that matters for now. The walk home from her parents' house in Bayside took 40 minutes. I didn't call a car. I needed the cold air. My phone buzzed twice. Both times, it was her. Where are you going? Jerome, don't be dramatic. I didn't answer either one. By the time I got back to my apartment, my hands were numb, and so was everything else. I sat on the edge of my bed still wearing my coat, staring at the ring box sitting on my dresser, the one I'd bought for her sister's engagement gift. Actually, a small joke between us that had somehow ended up displayed like a museum piece. I picked it up, set it back down. Something fell off in a way I couldn't name yet. The next morning, my business partner, Maurice, was waiting outside our office with 2 coffees, like he did most Mondays. He handed me one without a word, which was unusual for him. You look like hell, he said. Rough weekend. Rochelle called me. Said Yvonne's been telling people the wedding might get pushed back. Again, I hadn't told him anything about Sunday dinner yet. I didn't have the words for it. She said something to me. I said instead, in front of everyone. Maurice raised an eyebrow, waiting. She said I'll never make anyone proud enough to brag about me. Maurice didn't laugh, which I appreciated. He just exhaled slowly through his nose, the way he did when a client contract fell through. And what did you say back? Nothing. I left. He nodded once, like that answered something for him. Good. I didn't understand why that was good yet. Not that day. 3 years earlier, before any of this, Yvonne's father, a man named Daryl Whitfield, who'd built 2 car dealerships from nothing and never let anyone in the family forget it, had pulled me aside at a 4th of July barbecue. You know, he'd said, flipping a burger without looking at me. Yvonne likes a certain kind of man. Ambitious. The kind that ends up in magazines. I'd laughed it off then. I thought he was just proud of his daughter's taste. I hadn't understood what he actually meant until much later. For the next 2 months, things between Yvonne and me existed in a strange holding pattern. We still lived together. We still went through the motions, grocery runs, the shared Netflix account, the dry cleaning pickup schedule we'd had since year 1. But something had shifted, and neither of us said it out loud. Then came the dinner invitation from her cousin's engagement party. A different family gathering, a different tablecloth, the same undercurrent. Her mother asked me, gently, how the business was doing. Steady, I said. We landed a new contract with a regional shipping company last month. Her father, 2 seats down, didn't even look up from his plate. Regional, he repeated, like the word itself was an insult. Yvonne touched my arm under the table. Not comforting. Warning, don't embarrass us. I said nothing. That night, walking to the car, she finally spoke. You know he doesn't mean anything by it. He means exactly what he says, Yvonne. She stopped on the sidewalk, arms crossed. Why does it even matter what he thinks? Because it's not just him, I said. It's you too. You've never once corrected him. She didn't answer that. She just got in the car. I stood there a second longer than I needed to, looking at the parking meter, the receipt sticking halfway out of it, the small mundane world around us that had no idea anything was breaking. A week later, an email arrived that I almost deleted without reading. A former college classmate, someone I'd lost touch with, forwarding a link to a logistics conference in Chicago, panelists needed, last-minute cancellation. Did I want to fill a slot? I almost said no. I had a wedding to help plan, invitations to approve, a fiancé who barely looked at me some nights. Something made me say yes instead. I didn't tell Yvonne right away. That should have told me something too. The conference was 3 days. I sat on a panel about mid-sized logistics firms adapting to e-commerce disruption, alongside 2 founders whose companies were 10 times the size of mine. I was nervous walking in. I left with 4 business cards and a growing, unfamiliar feeling that maybe I wasn't as small as I'd been made to feel at every family dinner for the last 4 years. One of the men, a founder named Vernon Castellano, caught me in the hallway afterward. "You said something on that panel," he said, "about regional carriers getting squeezed out by the majors. Most people up there were reciting talking points. You actually had a thesis. Just something I've been dealing with firsthand." He handed me his card. "Call me next week. I might have something worth talking about." I put the card in my wallet and didn't think much more of it. Not yet. I flew home Sunday night. Yvonne picked me up from LaGuardia, which surprised me. She usually let me take a car service. "How was it?" she asked, pulling out of the terminal. "Good, actually. Really good." "That's nice," she said, in a tone that made it clear she hadn't asked because she cared about the answer. We drove the rest of the way in silence, the airport lights fading behind us, the radio playing low enough that neither of us bothered to turn it off or up. That wasn't the worst part of that week. I just didn't know it yet. The worst part came 4 days later, in the form of a voicemail from her mother, meant for Yvonne, accidentally sent to a group text that still included me from wedding planning. "Honey, your father and I really think you should talk to Preston before you make any final decisions about the venue. He knows people. Jerome's business is sweet, but it's not exactly something you build a life on." I read it twice, then a third time. Preston. I didn't even know who that was. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, next to a grocery bag I hadn't finished unpacking, a box of pasta sitting half tipped over. Yvonne came home 20 minutes later to find me sitting at the table, phone still lit up in front of me. "Who's Preston?" I asked. Her face did something complicated. Not quite guilt, not quite defiance. "He's just a friend of my dad's son. From the dealership." "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" She didn't answer right away. And in the silence, I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. I wasn't the plan. I was the placeholder. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't have the energy for another argument that would end with her crying and me apologizing for something I hadn't done. Instead, I called Vernon Castellano the next morning. "You said you might have something worth talking about," I said. "I'm ready to listen." Vernon's proposal was simple on paper, complicated in practice. His company needed a regional logistics partner on the East Coast, someone who understood the smaller carriers, the ones the big players overlooked. He wanted to invest in my firm directly, expand it, restructure it into something that could actually compete. It would mean longer hours, real risk, possibly failure. I said yes before I let myself think too hard about it. Maurice, when I told him, just grinned and shook his head. "About time," he said. "About time for what?" "For you to stop asking permission to be good at something." I didn't fully understand what he meant. Not yet, but I would. 6 weeks after the family dinner where Yvonne said what she said, we sat down to talk, really talk, for the first time in longer than either of us wanted to admit. "I think we should push the wedding," she said. "Not cancel. Just push it. Give things time to settle." Settle into what exactly? She looked at the table between us, at the coffee going cold in both our mugs. "I don't know anymore, Jerome. I don't know what I want." I nodded slowly. "I think I do." She looked up at that. "I want to stop being something you have to explain to your parents," I said. "I want to build something that doesn't need permission to exist." She didn't say anything for a long moment. "So that's it?" she finally asked. "You're just done?" I left the table that night for a reason, Yvonne. I think some part of me already knew. She didn't cry. I think some part of her already knew too. Moving out took 3 weekends. Boxes stacked in the hallway of an apartment that suddenly felt too big and too quiet at the same time. Maurice helped me carry the last of it down 4 flights of stairs, both of us sweating through our shirts in the July heat. "You good?" he asked, tossing me a water bottle. "No," I said honestly. "But I will be." He nodded like that was an acceptable answer. and we drove the last box to my new place. A smaller apartment in Sunnyside, closer to the office, further from everything that had defined the last 4 years of my life. The first few months of building the new company nearly broke me. We lost a client in September over a shipment delay that wasn't even our fault. Vernon's initial investment ran tighter than either of us projected. I stopped seeing most of my friends because there wasn't time. My sister, Deanna, called every Sunday just to make sure I was eating. "You look thin," she said once, over video call, squinting at her screen. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're building something. There's a difference." She wasn't wrong. There were small wins buried inside the setbacks. A logistics contract with a mid-size furniture retailer that actually turned a profit. A hire. A sharp young account manager named Candace who understood client relationships better than I did and wasn't afraid to tell me when I was wrong. "You keep underselling the company," she told me during her second week. "You talk like you're still apologizing for existing." "Old habit," I said. "Break it." I started to. By November, the business had grown enough that Vernon suggested restructuring again, bringing on 2 more regional partnerships, formalizing what had started as a handshake deal into something with actual weight behind it. "You're not the same guy I met in that hallway in Chicago," Vernon said, signing paperwork across from me in a conference room that finally had actual furniture instead of folding chairs. "Feels that way some days. Most days, if you're doing it right." I heard about Yvonne occasionally, through mutual friends, through Rochelle who still texted me, sometimes out of habit. She and Preston had started seeing each other, apparently, not long after the wedding was officially called off. Her parents seemed pleased about it, from what I gathered. I felt less about that news than I expected to. Mostly just a quiet, distant sadness. For the 4 years, not for the ending. Winter passed into spring. The company, now operating under a new name, Castellano Reyes Logistics, a nod to both founders, landed a contract with a national retail chain that tripled our revenue in a single quarter. I hired 11 people that spring. I stopped checking my bank account with dread. I didn't tell Yvonne's family any of it. I hadn't spoken to them since the night I walked out of that dinner. I didn't need them to know. But New York is a small city sometimes, especially in certain industries, and business news travels in strange directions. The magazine feature happened almost by accident. A financial reporter doing a piece on emerging logistics firms reshaping East Coast shipping reached out to Vernon, who redirected her to me. The interview ran in late spring, a full page, my photo next to a headline about the quiet firm outpacing the giants. I read it once, standing in the office break room, and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for almost a year. Maurice read it over my shoulder. "Proud of you," he said simply. That meant more than anything Daryl Whitfield had ever said to me. I didn't seek out the reaction from Yvonne's family. I didn't need to. Rochelle texted me a screenshot a week later. Her mother had shared the article on Facebook, tagged with the caption, "So happy for everyone's success." No mention of my name in the caption itself. Just the article, speaking for itself. I didn't respond to the text. I just closed my phone and went back to the client call I'd been on. The regret phase, if you could call it that, arrived quietly. No dramatic confrontation. No tearful phone call in the middle of the night. It arrived at a charity gala in early June, an industry fundraiser for small business development, the kind of event I would never have been invited to a year earlier. I was standing near the bar, talking with Candace and one of our newer clients, when I felt someone watching me from across the room. Daryl Whitfield stood near the entrance, in a suit that looked slightly too formal for the room, glancing around like he wasn't entirely sure why he'd been invited. He found his way over eventually, drink in hand, an expression on his face I hadn't seen before. Something closer to uncertainty than the confidence I remembered. "Jerome," he said, "didn't expect to see you here." "Didn't expect to be invited," I said honestly. He nodded, glancing down at his glass. A long pause stretched between us, longer than either of us seemed comfortable with. "I read the article," he finally said. "The one in the Business Journal. Figured you might have. It was a good piece." He cleared his throat. "You've built something real." I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence sit there the way he'd let so many silences sit at that dinner table a year earlier. "I appreciate you saying that," I said eventually. He extended his hand. Not a big gesture. Not an apology, exactly. Just a handshake, firm and brief, the kind 2 businessmen might exchange after closing a deal. I shook it, not because I needed his approval anymore, just because it felt like the right thing to do, for both of us, to close something that had been left open too long. "Take care of yourself," he said, and walked back toward the bar. I watched him go, then turned back to Candace, who raised an eyebrow but didn't ask. "Old family friend," I said. She let it go. I never saw Yvonne again after that night. Not in person, not really. I heard, secondhand, that she and Preston got engaged that fall. I felt nothing sharp about it. Just a quiet, settled kind of peace, the kind that comes after a wound has fully closed. Some evenings, walking home from the office through Long Island City, past the same streets I used to walk with dread, I'd think about that Sunday dinner. About the pot roast going cold. About the decision I made without fully understanding what it would cost, or what it would eventually give back. I never replied to her mother's Facebook post. I never needed to. Some conversations end forever the moment you decide to walk away from the table. I walked away. That was the last time any of it mattered.